All right, good evening. Welcome to Flyway Nights. Excited to have everybody here this evening joining us for the fifth of our sixth in this series this season. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Mike Davis. And Mike is an incredible volunteer with Yolo Basin Foundation, doing the tours out in the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area, but also participating in other activities, our school program and duck days and all of that. Next month, we're going to be hearing from Garrett Spann. Garrett is the wildlife area manager for the Yolo Bypass, and he's going to be giving us updates. And hopefully, by then, maybe the wildlife area will be open again. It's certainly doing its job right now, collecting the floodwaters and keeping our cities safe. And it is draining, but he does need to complete the work on the road repairs. So we expect it's going to be at least a few more weeks for the gravel to come and be dispersed and the roads to be repaired. Also want to make sure that you're aware that we have California Duck Days right around the corner. Big outdoor family festival, really fun for all ages. So hope you bring your group out. Great for the kids, great for the adults. And maybe you'll want to join us and help us to put on the event. So we will have opportunities for volunteers throughout that event. And this is a little information about that. So now we're going to be coming to our guest speaker, Mike Davis, who's going to be sharing his screen and telling us about the wonderful spectacles that we can see out there in the wildlife area. Hi, Mike. Great to have you with us.
Mike, thank you, Corky, and good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'm going to propose a list of what I consider significant wildlife displays. Now, this is just my list. It's subjective, and your list may be entirely different. And number one on my list may not make your list at all. But what I hope is that some of you might learn or be inspired by one or two things that weren't on your radar, and you might make an extra trip to the wildlife area to see something interesting in the natural world. So let me share the screen and we'll get started. Okay, here we go. So first of all, what is a spectacle? Well, spectacles are sold at a store that sells eyeglasses. These are great spectacles, no less. We're not talking about those. We're talking about a spectacle that can be defined as an eye-catching or dramatic public display of something notable or entertaining. So the key words here are eye-catching display. And I think we have those out at the wildlife area. So it's going to be a top 10 list. And it's the nature of a top 10 list to start at the bottom and work your way to the number one. But I do have some honorable mentions. So let's go over those. First of all, the fall colors. In the fall, the sun is low, shadows are long. We might have some beautiful winter clouds that contrast with the yellow and the brown and sometimes the red dried tules and cattails. The horizon is long, the sky is big, essentially because you're standing in a hole, right? The bypass is a low area. So that's the first honorable mention. The second one is the white-faced ibis, a beautiful bird, an iconic bird of the wetlands. And I like to recognize this bird. I mean, they're beautiful birds in their own right, but 30 years ago, you wouldn't have seen them in Yolo County. I have a copy of the 1993 Yolo Audubon bird checklist, and in 1993, they were rare for half the year and non-existent for the other half. So they just weren't around. The most recent checklist, 2019, has them abundant for 7 months of the year and present in numbers the rest of the year. So they went from rare to abundant. And surely habitat restoration, like the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area, had something to do with that. Maybe the flooding of rice fields that started in earnest in the early 1990s. Rice stubble was burned before that, and then the industry switched to flooding rice fields. That might have helped habitat for the ibis. And also the banning of DDT might have played a role. We know that DDT caused eggshell thinning and nesting failure in ibis. So anyway, the ibis is back and it's abundant, and it's certainly one of the spectacles, in my opinion. It's also fun to watch. They're gregarious, usually don't just see one, and when they fly in a group, when one glides, they all glide. When one flaps their wings, they all flap their wings. So they're kind of fun to watch. And the third honorable mention is the American white pelican. It, it's a spectacle. Even one bird like this is a spectacle. It's a huge animal. It's the largest bird in the bypass. It's the second largest bird in North America, only surpassed by the California condor. The wingspan is 9 to 9.5 feet. The bird weighs over 20 pounds. Now, to be fair, there are some swans that can weigh 20 pounds too. So that's a small shout out to swans that could have made the list. But yet, despite their big size, they float very high in the water. If you watch them swim the next time you see some, because their bones are hollow. The entire North American population nests in fewer than 60 colonies. No doubt there were a number of colonies in California, but we only have one nesting colony now in the Klamath Basin in the northeast part of the state. But the closest nesting colony is on Pyramid Lake in Nevada. Pyramid Lake is just northeast of Reno. It's the terminus of the Truckee River. It's a very interesting lake. It's a large lake. There is an island that looks like a pyramid, and south of that very conspicuous island is another island, and that's where the white pelicans nest. It's the largest pelican nesting site in Western North America. And these birds are such proficient flyers, they can commute between Lake Pyramid and the Central Valley. They're just quite a unique bird and a real spectacle. Even during flight, they're so big. You can see them far in the distance when they're riding on thermals, and so they tilt this way and that way. And when the sun bounces off their back, they're highly visible. When they tilt the other way, you may not see them at all. So that's another wildlife spectacle. Really a majestic bird. Okay, well, that brings us up to my list. We're going to start at number 10 and work our way up to the most astonishing spectacle, according to me. Blackbird murmurations are fun. They're certainly eye-catching. It's hard to take your eyes off them. It's a type of a spectacle. I saw blackbird spectacles just recently standing on the west levee of the bypass, looking west towards the big gray rice dryer that's just outside the entrance to the wildlife area. They weren't massive murmurations, but they were fun to watch. The blackbirds have very fast reflexes, and they can process visual information very quickly. So what they're doing is they're taking a cue off the neighboring birds, and it seems like they're all flying exactly in unison. So blackbird murmurations. Well, this next slide, this is from Jim and Pam Dunn, who are watching this murmuration nearby not too long ago when it came their way. Flew right over them, so that was fun. They have that entire video on YouTube. Number 9, Dragonflies. I think a lot of us overlook the dragonflies in the wildlife area. Maybe you think June and July it's too hot to visit the wildlife area, but dragonflies are just as colorful as birds. They're not as big, but they're an awfully big insect. And at any one visit to the wildlife area in the summer, you'll easily see 6 species or more. There are about 20 species in our area. They're colorful. You can use common names. The dragonflies are usually sexually dimorphic, meaning the males and the females look different from each other. So you need to learn both of those, but they're fun to learn. Let me just go over a few of them. Upper left is the common green darner. This is the male. It's part green and part blue. This is the common big dragonfly you see around, you see in your yards and in parks and so forth. Upper right is the widow skimmer, a very common dragonfly out of the bypass. The flame skimmer, and then the blue dasher. And this is a male blue dasher. It's all blue. This is the abundant small dragonfly. The females of the blue dasher are brown and yellow and have red eyes, so quite a bit different than the males. The upper left is the spot-winged glider. I include this one not because it's usually very common, but in 2023, 2 years ago, it was abundant. And it was abundant in backyards and parks and so forth. When a dragonfly larva or nymph matures and crawls out of the water onto a stem or the trunk of a tree and breaks out of its exoskeleton, the dragonfly is an adult, but it's not a mature adult at that time. So the dragonfly leaves the waterway where it was born, hatched, and it flies somewhere else to feed. They're voracious feeders. Then the dragonfly matures, and then it flies back to its original waterway. So that's why you see them far away from the water. They're adults, but they're not mature adults. They do fly back. Upper right is the variegated meadowhawk. It's very common, and it's a pretty gold color. The 12-winged skimmer, and then the common whitetail. It's a very robust dragonfly. It's not that common in my opinion, but you'll definitely see it. So they're all beautiful, and I'm just giving you a sample of the dragonflies. I'm not even going to mention the damselflies. Next is the waterfowl that spend their winter in the Central Valley. And we have about 8 million waterfowl that spend the winter here in the Central Valley. So bird migration is number 8, essentially. And certainly bird migration is one of the greatest wildlife spectacles on the planet, right? Some birds fly. There's a tern that flies from the Arctic to the Antarctic. You can't get any farther than that. It's not unexpected that all these ducks in this picture flew 1,000 miles anyway, and some a lot longer than that. So we'll highlight the ducks here as number 8, the great variety of ducks. And of course, a lot of people visit the wildlife area in the fall when the ducks arrive. And a pair of good binoculars will show you how beautiful each species is. For us, the pintail is the most common duck in the wildlife area, followed by shovelers. The pintail is actually the most common duck in the Central Valley. 5 million ducks, 3 million geese, and other waterfowl. The pintails make the biggest part of the pie there. But the population of pintails is gradually declining for some unknown reason. There are some ducks that are increasing. The ringneck duck is showing a steady increase. Mallards go up and down. So it's very interesting to follow the population of the birds. Here's a composite that Jim Dunn put together for me. We have this hanging on our wall now, but just shows you how beautiful these ducks are. And this, of course, is just a sampling of the ducks in the wildlife area. Number 7, a lot of us go to the wildlife area hoping to see a mammal, maybe some reptiles. There's something for everyone. So let me just mention a few. Here's a red fox. There was a den of red fox in 2023, 2 years ago, right behind the wildlife headquarters on Childs Road. So we volunteers saw this family all the time. The parents and this kit's siblings would see somebody and scurry down their underground den where they were safe. But this one stayed out and did a lot of people watching. And it was very strange. I mean, we welcomed it, but I mean, this photo was taken with my phone, it would just, and you dog owners know when a canine rests its hips flat on the ground, it's comfortable, right? And this little guy would just watch people. We thought maybe it was sick, but as far as I know, it and its siblings grew up healthy and dispersed. So red fox, you don't see red fox at the wildlife area. The reason they den near people is not because they like people, it's because they can't tolerate coyotes, and there are no coyotes where there are people, that many people. So the red fox isn't expected in the wildlife area, but certainly there may be one that passes through, but I'm sure there are no dens out there. There are just too many coyotes. Everybody likes to see beavers. And let me tell you, just recently, about, what was it, 3 weeks ago or so, the bypass flooded. Well, you can imagine that displaced lots of animals, including the beavers. And if you walk the West Levee after that flooding event, there were beavers, unfortunately, obviously in distress, just swimming around the edge of the levee because their homes were now underwater, temporarily anyway. So we saw beaver when we walked on the levee. My neighbor saw 8 of them. And then other people told me about beavers too. So often you don't really get to see them out the wildlife area because they come out when the sun goes down, so the wildlife area closes. But here was a good opportunity. And even if you don't see beavers, you see their signs. Here on the right, there are a couple of dams. These are in the wildlife area. And then in the lower left, I have a photo of a lodge. And this lodge is in the Davis Wetlands, and it's right next to the road. The Davis Wetlands is currently closed because there was like a sinkhole in the road, and you can't get by. But you could walk in. It's a little ways. But when it opens, this beaver lodge has been there for several years, and it's right by the road. So that's kind of fun. Upper left is another beaver dam. This dam it's still there. It's hard to see now, but it's just to the west of the first bridge as you go from parking lot A to parking lot B. And the upper right is a muskrat den. Most of them are near the water, but sometimes I've seen more than one muskrat den on the side of the levee, easily visible in the spring when the grass is low. And then a felled tree by a beaver, another obvious sign of a beaver activity. And there's lots of otters, of course, in the wildlife area. If you spend any time out there, you're going to see otters. And again, with this flooding event, they were also swimming around next to the levees. They don't look distressed whenever, but anyway, they're also swimming around. Upper right is a mink. And here again, if you spend enough time in the wildlife area, you'll come across a mink either crossing the road or hunting along the banks of one of the waterways. The raccoons during this flooding event often take to the trees, and they may be visible if you walk the levee. But otherwise, you don't see a lot of them in the wildlife area because they're more active at night, but you do sometimes see them hunting during the day. There's plenty of raccoons out there. Their tracks are evident everywhere. And then coyotes. I think there's lots of coyotes. And if you want to see a coyote, in my experience anyway, go early in the morning to the wildlife area. And they seem to be moving out or away from people, away from activity. Last spring, I bet some of you saw this too. Last spring, there were a couple of pups, a family with a couple of pups on the auto tour route, and I saw them several times. So that's kind of fun. Plenty of coyotes anyway. And there's something for everybody. So let me mention the snakes because it's kind of a favorite of mine. So these are some of the snakes that you'll see. On the top are three color forms or morphs of the California king snake. The common one is the snake on the upper left, but I did take a picture of this snake with a lot of white in it, so it seems speckled or gray. And then on the upper right is a very dark one. You can barely see the white bands. Well, the best time to see snakes, if you're interested, April, May, and the first half of June. Visit the wildlife area mid-morning when it warms up. That's when the snakes are active, and drive slowly because you'll see them crossing the road, and you'll see king snakes and gopher snakes, the bottom right, that's the largest snake in the bypass, and yellow-bellied racers in the middle, greenish, are very fast. They're very alert. You probably won't get a chance to get very close to a racer. Usually they're just zipping across the road really fast. I was able to get a photo here because it was a cold day, and the bigger one is a female, and there were a couple of males around her, so they were occupied. So I was lucky to get a photo. And then on the bottom left is the common garter snake. It is common. It's a small snake. Look for it in shallow water, chasing mosquito fish and tadpoles. If you're really lucky, you might see a giant garter snake. That requires more luck. Okay, and one more comment about the snakes. In July and August, it's too hot for the snakes, so they have to become nocturnal. So a good time to see snakes is to walk on the top of the levees at sunset. The wildlife area is closed at sunset, but you can walk on top of the levees, and snakes are often active at that time. In fact, all of those king snake photos are from the top of the levee. Okay, number 6, snow geese. And I'm going to lump Ross's geese in this, white geese or light geese. They're a spectacle. Of course, they're a large bird. In the last 3 years, we've averaged 1.2 million in the Central Valley. And of course, they don't fly alone. There's often hundreds of them, or sometimes thousands of them flying or feeding in a field. They're certainly a spectacle. They're beautiful birds. Some of them fly 3,000 miles away to get to the Central Valley in overwinter. Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean is just about 3,000 miles away, so it's quite a journey. It's not unexpected that these birds would fly 2,000 miles, certainly. There are 1.2 million white geese and about 600,000 white-fronted geese. 80-something thousand swans. That's my shout out to swans, and over 600,000 coots. So total birds in the central, migratory birds, waterfowl in the Central Valley in the wintertime is about 8 million. And of course, this is a spectacle we all love to see and hear, the snow geese flying overhead in large skeins like this. That's fun. Sometimes there seems to be so many snow geese, there's just not room for anything else. Actually, there's a research project looking at just that. Okay, well, now we're up to our top 5 and a little bit more serious spectacles now. This is Downingia. This is a wildflower. It only lives in the Central Valley. in wetlands, like in the bypass. California only has 5% of the wetlands that we used to have. So plants and animals that are unique to the wetlands of the Central Valley are fighting for their lives. They don't have a lot of habitat left. But we're lucky we have several species of Downingia, and California is really the center of Downingia diversity. There are 13 species in the world, and they're all in California. One is also in Chile, and no doubt it was transported to Chile by some migratory bird long ago, because California is really the center for these beautiful flowers. And so visit the wildlife area in April and May, and you will see these displays of Downingia, also called calico flower. I suppose it's hard to see on your screen, but the causeway's in the back there, so you kind of know where you are. This is between parking lot A and B, but there are other places in the wildlife area where you can see extensive displays like this. If you walk out there and look at them, don't step on them. They're all precious. Another view. And just a couple of notes. We could spend a lot of time on this flower. It's so unique. But let me tell you that each flower is male before it's female. So it has pollen first, and pollen is produced in the anthers. And in this case, the anthers are united along their length. So there's a hollow center in this tube formed by the anthers. And the pollen is shed inside that hollow space. So the pollen can't get out. So what happens is we have a particular native bee. It's a ground nesting native bee that lives in codependency with the Downingia, and a particular Downingia. In this case, the flat-faced Downingia, the one that's at the wildlife area. So this small bee comes along, and there are two filaments at the tip of these united anthers. The bee somehow pushes against that and triggers the anthers to split open, and the bee is bombarded with pollen. So now the pollen is all gone, and then the female part of the flower, the style and the stigma, mature, but the pollen is gone. So another bee that visited from another patch of Downingia lands on that flower that's now female and pollinates it. So you see, this bee assures cross-pollination. And the reason for that is genetic diversity, which is beneficial to a species. So it's kind of amazing. This bee nests in the ground. It makes a ball of pollen and nectar, lays an egg on the ball. The egg hatches, the larva eats and grows and pupates by fall into an adult, and the adult just stays underground and doesn't chew its way out until the next spring when Downingia is flowering. So it's an amazing system. It's an amazing plant. If you go out there, you'll see the common purple variety. There is a blue one, and if you look hard, you can find a white one, white and yellow without any blue pigments. It's quite variable. So that's a very fun one. My number four spectacle is the fairy shrimp that we have in this area. So there's a lot of unique animals and plants in the Central Valley. And again, we only have 5% of our wetlands left. But California is one of the world's hot spots for fairy shrimp diversity. So fairy shrimp is a very small type of crustacean. They're like 3/4 of an inch or something like that. It's variable, but the ones that we have around here are that small. They used to be a dominant animal in the ocean, but 400 million years or so, fish evolved. And that was the end of fairy shrimp in the ocean. They're defenseless against fish. So today you only find them in water features that don't have any fish. And that would be temporary bodies of water like vernal pools, or bodies of water that are hypersaline like Mono Lake, the Great Salt Lake, the salt flats in South San Francisco Bay. Maybe you've flown into San Francisco Airport and seen the red color of the salt flats. Those are brine shrimp. And if you ever get a chance to take your canoe out at Mona Lake, do it and look down. There's some trillion brine shrimp in Mona Lake. And each of these is its own species. So the one that's in Mona Lake is one species and occurs nowhere else. There are 26 species of fairy shrimp in California, and we're lucky to have some around here. The the male is at the top there. They're identified with these claspers that the males use for mating. The female has an egg sac here, and you can see the eggs, the orange eggs. Well, inside would be a fully developed embryo surrounded by a very complex shell. And this shell protects that little embryo from heat, from cold, from drought, from radiation. They've been taken into space. They survive the vacuum of space. Because they're going to live in temporary bodies of water, they don't know when conditions are going to be favorable for them. So they have to exist in the hot summers in California, totally dried, baking hot, and they survive just fine. They can certainly survive for decades and possibly for centuries. Nobody's quite sure. Well, we have vernal pools in the wildlife area, but they're located in the far southern reaches of the wildlife area. And there's no road, there's no maintained road, there's no infrastructure. It's a working cattle ranch or a working cattle lease anyway. Yeah, there are no facilities, there's no supervision. It's kind of isolated. So you can't really visit that area, but just know that there are some spectacular vernal pools in the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. And with those vernal pools are spectacular wildflower displays. Well, if you're interested in fairy shrimp like I am, I'm going to tell you where you can see some. This is a different kind of a temporary pool. It's like a vernal pool that's not sexy. It's a mud puddle. And there are fairy shrimp in the mud puddles in Yolo County. This is next to the Little League field complex in Davis. There's only one Little League field complex, so you can find it. It's just to the west of this railroad track. And in between the Little League field and the railroad track are mud puddles every winter. And every winter there are fairy shrimp. It's called the versatile fairy shrimp. It's a common fairy shrimp. It's not protected. Many of the fairy shrimp are protected, and so you can't touch them. But this one is common. It occurs from the bay to up into the Sierra Mountains. So 11 days ago, I visited these puddles here, and they had less water in them. They had very little water in them, but they were fairy shrimp. 10 days ago, they were all dried up. So I'm afraid you've missed it this year, but definitely if you're interested in seeing fairy shrimp, they're really captivating. They're kind of amazing. So that's one place. I'm going to tell you two more places that you can see fairy shrimp, if you're interested in them as I am. This is the corner of Putah Creek and Old Davis Road. So it's south of the campus. And this would be the southwest corner. Putah Creek is under the bridge there. That's Old Davis Road that's crossing Putah Creek. And every winter there's a puddle or a small pond here, temporary body of water, and it has fairy shrimp in it. If you drive by there and you see egrets feeding on something in that puddle, it's going to be fairy shrimp. They're a pretty good indicator in a temporary pool of water like this. Also, yellow legs I find is a good indicator of fairy shrimp if you have a temporary body of water. So this is a good place. It's dry now, so I think we missed it. Actually, anywhere along the railroad track from here to the center of Davis, there are mud puddles, and you can find fairy shrimp there too. Also, one other place. if you know the Davis Grasslands Park on Mace Boulevard, it's south of I-80 on Mace. The Grassland Park is on a section of land, a mile by a mile, and that section of land is surrounded by a road, asphalt road. Mace is on the west and whatever the other roads are. But if you drive around that section and look into mud puddles along the road, there's another type of fairy shrimp. And I don't know the identity of that one, but it could be a protected one. So you probably can't mess with that one. But there, anyway, there's another place. Once you find fairy shrimp in a mud puddle, you will never look at a mud puddle the same way again. Okay. Oh, and so what I did was collect some of the mud from the Little League field site, and I just put it in a plastic container. And I just left it in the baking hot sun all summer long, not worried about it at all. In this past November, we had an atmospheric river. We had quite a bit of rain, and it filled up the tub. And in a few days, if you look carefully right now, you're going to see some movement. Those are young fairy shrimp. And then not very much later, days, maybe a little over a week, they're able to complete their life cycle like in 2 weeks. They'll live longer than that, but they don't need a lot of time. So watch again as the fairy shrimp are mature now. And you'll also see some seed shrimp swimming around too, right now. So there it is. I hope you saw those. So I have my own little pets. So now the container is just about dry again, and I'll just leave it in the sun, no problem. They survive in those cysts again, and they're able to withstand really harsh conditions. Okay, number 3 is the salmon returning to Putah Creek. So salmon life cycle is I think, one of the great wildlife spectacles on the planet again. And we're lucky that we have salmon returning to Putah Creek. This year, a camera was set up. They put a little fence in the creek, so the fish had to go through this channel, and they got their picture taken. And if you're interested in looking at the photos and looking at the daily data, go to Biotactic. It's some company that they hired, various agencies, Biotactic Putah Creek, and you'll find that's where I got this photo, for example. This is the photo of an actual Chinook salmon swimming upriver. Unfortunately, this was not a good year for the salmon. Last year, there were almost 900 that made it to winters, to the gravel beds in winters, but this year there were less than 200, unfortunately. But they are Chinook salmon. It's great to see them. It's a transformative event for Putah Creek to have the salmon back. And there's lots of improvements going to be made to Putah Creek to favor the fish. This year, there was a temporary fish ladder in the wildlife area to let them get over the Los Rios check dam by parking lot G, if you're familiar with that. And here I'm standing on the banks of Putah Creek and just watching the salmon. Okay, great fun to see those salmon. And I want to make another point. The Department of Water Resources is just completing what they call the Big Notch. It has another name, but the Big Notch is a fish passage through the Fremont Weir. It's in the center, more or less the center of this photo, this artist rendition. And so when the river is high and water flows through that fish passage, the mature salmon coming up from the ocean can either go up the Sacramento River or they can come up through the tow drain and the Tule Canal in the Yolo Bypass. So now the sturgeon especially had no way of getting past the Fremont Weir, but now this big notch, they call it, is big enough for sturgeon and for the salmon. But also important, so we're looking south here, by the way. We're looking south, and the right part of the photo above is the bypass. The levee is that light brown ribbon down the middle of the photograph. And you can walk here, you can visit it. The light green and the oak trees and the bypass there, that's another wildlife area. It's called the Fremont Weir Wildlife Area, I think. But what I want to mention is the young salmon, the juvenile salmon trying to get to the ocean can either go down the Sacramento River, here it would be to the left, or if it's flooded, they can choose to go through that notch and go down the Tule Canal and through the bypass into the delta. The reason this is pretty interesting is because the young salmon that choose to go through the bypass and not the river are twice as big as the ones that go down the river. So the chances of survival are much greater if they use the bypass. And there's a lot of research on this, and I'm just trying to summarize it in a couple of sentences. But here, the 4 fish on the left went down through the bypass and were caught in Rio Vista. In the same cohort of young salmon on the right went down the Sacramento River, and they're much smaller. So that's the important thing. And why are these juvenile salmon bigger that use the bypass? Well, there's a lot more food in the water. The water's warmer, it's shallow, the wetlands is highly productive. That's one of the definitions of a wetland, isn't it? So I'm going to come back to that. These invertebrates in the water in the wetlands, just look, they're kind of reddish. I'm going to come back to that. Okay, the second, number 2 wildlife spectacle of the bats. And I don't have to say too much about the bats. Hopefully all of you have attended the nightly bat show with Corky and the Yolo Basin Foundation. The wildlife area, of course, is closed at sunset, but if you attend one of these programs, you get to go out there and stand right next to the bats as they fly out of their roost for the evening. And you might be able to see, if you're lucky, you'll see a bat for dinner. And we all have photos like this, don't we? I'll just say a couple of things about bats that amazes me. I'm still amazed that the Mexican free-tailed bats here, maybe the most common mammal in North America, but they also can fly almost 100 miles an hour in horizontal flight. That's faster than any bird. And so they just amaze me. I'll leave all the rest to Corky to explain on the bat program. Okay, so finally we're at my number 1 wildlife spectacle. And I think it may not be yours, but mine is swarms of midges, another insect. So there's a 2-week period, about a 2-week period in June when the midges hatch in tremendous numbers, like billions. And I've tried to do some calculations, billions for sure. And that may be an underestimate. They're little tiny flies. They don't bite. They're called non-biting gnats or non-biting midges. They're related to no-see-ums and black flies, but they don't bite. In fact, most species, there are thousands of species, most species don't feed at all. But they swarm in this 2-week period. But there's a peak. There's a peak of 1 or 2 days when it's just phenomenal to visit. And yes, they're in the morning and in the evening. In my opinion, I could be wrong, but in my opinion, the time to go is early in the morning on a still day in this 2-week period. The swarms can be 60 feet high. The whole bypass looks like it's on fire. In fact, I was told once that a CHP officer stopped once and was going to report a fire in the bypass because that's what it looks like. You can hardly see downtown Sacramento. It's just a haze. And these swarms are all male. The females are down in the vegetation. And apparently the females fly up into a swarm and pick a mate. How they do that, I don't know. But they're in just incredible numbers. And they start their life as a small larvae. A lot of them are red. They're called bloodworms. Fly fishermen know about bloodworms. They're eaten by everything. There may be a half inch or so long, or a little bit longer. They're small. A lot of them are red because they have hemoglobin. It helps them store oxygen because they live in an oxygen poor environment at the bottom of these ponds. They're really foundational to the food web in the bypass. There can be thousands per square yard of wetlands bottom of any waterway out there. So you see the ducks the dabbling ducks feeding on the bottom, filtering whatever they can find. Sure, they're eating seeds, but they're eating a lot of these midge larvae. The scientific name is chironomid. There are different names for the adults, bayflies, muckleheads, Canadian soldiers for some reason. I guess the swarms come over the border in Minnesota. In the South, they're called chizzywinks, lots of different names. But these little tiny larvae then, I showed you the beaker full of the invertebrates that the salmon, juvenile salmon are feeding on. That's why they're twice as big if they go through the bypass. They're feeding on these larvae, which are abundant. Okay, what else can I say to convince you to go see them? Oh, I do have to admit, though, that not every year is a super hatch. 2 years ago, I call it a super hatch. That's not a scientific term, but they were just incredible. Last year was a disappointment. Sure, there were chizzywinks out there, but they weren't. They just paled in numbers compared to the year before. So I don't know what this year's going to be. And they're kind of fun too if you can play with them. They like to swarm above something like a bush or a tree or your car or even you. You can take a hat on a stick and they'll swarm above the hat. You can sing a note or clap your hands and the swarm will disperse and then come right back together. So they're very entertaining. And you've seen chizzywinks or midges all the time. There are thousands of species. There are species that hatch every month of the year. You've seen them in your yard, at the park, looking down your street when the sun is low. You'll see little gnats in the air. It's midges. They have many different habitats. The larvae live in the soil, in turf. Here's a little cloud of them, looks like a ghost at a nearby park in Davis. So chizzywinks, put that on your radar. And thank you for listening. I'd like to know what's on your list, and I hope to see you in the wildlife area, especially in June on some morning. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks so much. I admit the midge are fascinating. I love being out there in the evening, when we're doing the bat tours and watching the midge. And they look like smoke. So if people have questions or comments for Mike, if you want to drop them in the chat, we can read them out. Or one of the things he has right here on his screen is what is on your list. So maybe you have something you would like to share. Lots of great talks, lots of comments like that. Hopefully this will get people to come out and enjoy the wildlife area. I'm going to bring us back around too. I want to make sure that people are aware of what we're doing next month. Next month for our Flyway nights, we'll be hearing from Garrett Span about the updates of the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. And wouldn't it be great if the roads are back up and running by the time he gives his talk? We don't know. There's another rain event, of course, coming through very soon. So we'll see what happens, but they're out there, they're working on the roads and hopefully getting things back in shape. And just also one more final reminder, we have Duck Days coming up upon us, so want to make sure everybody is aware, and we'd love to see you out there in the wetlands, having a great time. And thank you so much, Mike, for I lost my Zoom. There we are, for joining us. And
Yes, you're welcome.
I see a couple of comments here. I see we have a question asking about butterflies. Are there any butterflies out there?
Wow. I suppose there are, but you know, certainly I can't remember the name of the moth, the woolly bear moth right now. It escapes me. I
Tiger
don't
moth.
see a lot of butterflies, but yeah, I guess they're not on my radar. Maybe they should be, but yeah. More of the moths than the butterflies, I think.
And then I see a comment here. It says yellow-billed magpies. So I am guessing that someone is saying that
Yeah,
that's
but I
their
don't see
favorite.
yellow-billed magpies I don't associate yellow-billed magpies with the wetlands.
We see them
I,
in the demonstration areas sometimes going in the garbage cans after the kids have left. Um,
yeah, I see them in the fields. I see them in the
mhm.
fields around Davis, around the campus, certainly. But I don't associate them with the wetlands. But certainly it's a fabulous bird. I agree with that.
Got another question here. Mike, was the midge a clear winner or was it a runoff?
Oh no, the midge is a clear winner. Yes, it's just amazing to see the numbers. If there are 1,000 per square yard, and they undergo synchronous hatching, they all hatch at the same time. If there are just 1,000 per square yards, and we have 7,000 acres of wetlands, that's almost 34 billion. So they're just an incredible sight. If you haven't experienced them, you have to do that.
Well, and if you
My
drive
clear,
over the freeway at the right time, sometimes you even see them coming up off the bridge.
right, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Got another person said that owls are on their list,
Oh yeah, that could have been on my list. The great horned owls, of course. That's a wildlife spectacle for sure. Yeah.
and they're nesting now. We're starting to see some of the little horns sticking up.
Yeah, they're early nesters for sure. Yeah.
All right, so hopefully people come on down into the bypass into the wildlife area. Oh, got a Ken Ely here saying common buckeye butterfly.
Okay. Yeah, I see that one. I see that one in my yard sometimes. Yeah.
Oh, and the yellow sulfur butterfly.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, got some wildlife fans. What time of year do the midge hatch?
Only in June and roughly a 2 week period in June. They don't last long, so you don't want to miss them.
Wonder how many get eaten by the bats.
Well, I'm talking about the midge that forms these huge swarms in the wildlife area. There are midges all year round, but yeah,
And I was just thinking if but it's a bat in June and it just flies on through, opens its mouth.
yeah,
Bitterns, here's another one.
yeah.
Yeah, lots of
Magnificent
great
bird.
things
Yeah,
out there.
yeah.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Mike. Thanks for joining us
Okay.
this evening. Thank you to everyone for coming, and we hope we see you out there in the wetlands.
Okay, thank you.
Have a great evening. Bye-bye, everybody.